Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to my first ever podcast. This is a podcast called The Man, the Father, the Legend. I am your host, David Ford, and we're going to talk to a lot of different fathers and share experiences and create a safe space for people, fathers rather, to share their experiences, talk about some of their troubles, and give some advice and encouragement to any other fathers, recent fathers, expecting fathers, etc. So, we're gonna get started with my first guest. This man is a man of excellence and class, and I look up to and admire. He is the CEO and founder of Walker Media Group LLC. He is a pastor, a teacher, an educator for years. Earned his doctorates of education at Northeastern University. I present to you guys none other than Dr. David Walker. How you doing, sir?
Hey, David, I am doing great, and I am just super excited to be on your show today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm excited to have you. Now, out of that introduction, is there anything that I have left out or may not have explained fully to the greatest extent of your accomplishments?
Well, no, I mean, listen, you've covered it, and I appreciate you acknowledging those few things that I've done. But of course, we're on here to talk about being a father, and really that's the one. If I was to say that you left out, but that's all right. But that's the one we want to get to because it's all about fatherhood. It's all about the impact of what a dad is, and I'm just so glad to be on to share. Of course, I'm a father of two. I have two adult children. My son David Jr. and I have a daughter by the name of Elizabeth. They're in their mid 30s, so they're grown.
Yeah.
And my son, him and his wife, they have given us two grandchildren, so the legacy continues.
Yes,
And I
sir.
have David the third and Navy Rose. So I'm just happy to be here today to talk about the impact of being a father.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, the most important thing or the most important role that you and I share is that we're fathers. And I just had my first son last year. He is David Jr. And I just want you to explain for me or kind of share with me because I remember vividly, maybe because it was a year ago. But do you remember the day you found out that you were going to be a father?
You know, I do. And it was literally 34 years ago.
Mm,
Um, my wife was upstairs in our second floor, up in the bedroom, and she walks down the stairs, and this is what she said, and it's amazing. She looks at me and she says, "Guess what?" And it was just something about the way she said, "Guess what?" Now, because guess what? Guess what we're having for dinner? Guess
right.
what? Guess who's coming over? It could have been anything that she wanted me to guess, but for some reason, I guess it was something in the air, something in the atmosphere, something in our spirits.
Mhm.
And when she said, "Guess what?" I said, "You're pregnant." And she shook her head and she said, "Yeah." And at that time we were married for 3 years at least. Well, I guess we would be 2.5 because when our son was born, he was born 3 years after we were married. So I guess definitely a little over 2 years when she's coming down the stairs to make this announcement.
Right.
And I don't know why, but I hit it right on the head. I said, "You're pregnant." And she said, "Yes." And so that was my first knowledge that I was going to be a dad.
And how did that fit? How did that feel? What was your initial reaction to that?
You know, we, as I recall, we were not necessarily trying to have children, not necessarily trying, but it just kind of fit. It was that feeling of excitement, that feeling of euphoria and happiness, because what it was telling me was that I was moving to a new level of life.
Right.
I didn't necessarily totally say, well, when I be a dad, it wasn't necessarily something that I maybe dreamt about, or, of course, we all want to one day it to happen, but it's not like every day you're looking for, you're making plans for it. But when it happened, it was like one of the greatest feelings that I think you could have, because now what you realize is that a part of you is beginning to be developed.
Right.
It's your seed, it's from your body. And now this person, whatever it was going to be at the time, and of course, going back into the 1960s, I'm not 1960, the 1980s. Well, maybe they did have gender reveals, but anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't think so, because we didn't know what our children were going to be, neither the first or the second. So
Right.
I definitely know the gender reveals weren't about, around that time. But it was a great feeling, because I was about to be a dad, and I was very proud of it.
Yeah. 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 So you said you don't really recall gender reveals being the things where baby showers a thing. I know nowadays that's like an essential thing. Once you find out you're having a kid, let's start planning the baby showers.
Yeah, yeah. And I do, and again, in recalling, 1986 was when my son was born.
Okay.
Uh, and I know my daughter was born in 89, and I'm positive that we did not know what the child was going to be. And I tell you why. If I can move to the second child, I
Mhm.
think that's going to help me to process this. We had our first son. He was a boy, and of course, just like you, I named him David.
Yeah.
So I have a David Jr. as well.
Right.
And but when we were and my wife and I guess we had an affinity for the male child.
Mhm.
We, in other words, we were looking for a second son.
Right.
As a matter of fact, and I'm going to tie in a little bit of a story to that. So we were looking for a second son, and we named the second son William Thomas.
Okay.
William was my grandfather on my father's side, and Thomas was my grandfather on my mother's side. So this fellow was going to be William Thomas Walker,
Okay.
Esquire. No. We had high hopes for the fella. You know what I'm saying? And so we go to the birthing table on the second child. My wife goes into labor. We rush to the hospital, and now I'm in the room. Here comes this baby. He's coming out of his mother. She had, I guess you call it a vaginal birth.
Mhm.
I'm in the room. I'm cheering her on. She's saying, "Leave me alone. It's your fault." That kind of stuff that they say right there in the room. Anyway, here comes a girl.
Mhm.
Here comes a girl. We were not even anticipating a girl. And I remember saying, I always called my wife Ma. Even to this day, she's Ma. Ma. I said, Ma, it's a girl. I was totally surprised. And just so again, I know that we didn't know. And if I could just give this part of the story, this just to
Mhm.
kind of give everybody the climax of it. We had spent so many days telling our son, who was about 3 years old at the time his sister was born, that the child's name was going to be William.
Right.
So now we got to come up with another name, because we didn't even have a name. So several days after my daughter's here, we finally come up with this name, Elizabeth. And then when we bring her home from the hospital, we say to my son, David, here's your new sister. Her name is Elizabeth. And he says, no, y'all told me the baby's name was going to be William. He kept saying, hey, William, how you doing, William? So for about 3 weeks, he called this baby William. He refused to call Elizabeth, because we told him that the new baby was going to be William. And it took him a while to get used to it. So I know we didn't have no gender reveals, because we were totally surprised,
Right,
you
right,
know,
right.
at what we had.
That is funny. That's funny. So, what is your mentality? So, you have a baby boy, now you have a baby girl. How different is it in terms of how you approach raising a baby boy versus a baby girl?
Yeah, it's totally different. I think originally I tried to give both of them sort of like the same nurturing. Um, what I gave my son, now here I have a daughter. In my mind, you kind of like raise them the same way.
Hmm.
But there comes a point in time when the distinction between the male child and the female child is clear,
Right.
and you have to think like that. And unfortunately, even as they get into their older ages, boys, you just like let them go outside and play,
Yeah,
go do it. You don't even look at it. Matter of fact, I was talking with my son this past Sunday, which was Father's Day, and him and I were in the park with his son, and we were talking, and he's looking at his son because the son was kind of running through the park a little bit. He's looking at his son saying, don't go too far, don't go too far. And he says to me, he says, well, you remember when I was his age, it was a totally different world because you would let me go run all around the park, wouldn't even come looking for me. You said
right, right.
you would sit there and then just tell me to come back 15, 20 minutes later. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, basically there is a difference. Yeah, you should give your child love across the board. You love your children right across the board, but they are different. And then you have to find the differences, and then you have to love them within the things that are different from one another. Because if you love all your children the same, I don't think that's the plan for a successful relationship from father to son, because they are different.
Right, right, right. So has there ever been a moment when your daughter felt like, "Hey, Dad, you're treating me differently. Can you kind of back off?" Or how did you manage that? Because I know at some point she realized I'm being raised a little bit differently.
Well, she's 34. Oh no, she's 31, and I don't think we've arrived yet with her feeling that I treat her different than her brother.
Hmm.
And I think it's a lot of different reasons for that, because he was obviously 3 years older,
Right.
and he was a male child. And I think sometimes when you're the second child, and then when you are a female, you process the treatment
Hmm.
differently.
Right.
And even as a parent, where you try not to say, well, I'm treating him different. I mean, it's not that you're treating them specially, but sometimes they recognize the difference, and they feel like you're being unfair. That's the word you used earlier. Uh, Dad, you're being unfair. And we did go through that, especially through her teen years,
Hmm.
um, because I think that you do have a little bit more concern for the female child than you do the male. At least going back to when my kids were growing up, mid 1990s, so on and so forth.
Right. Okay. Okay. Now, I don't have any blood sisters. Now, I do have one uh, person who I call my sister. She's my blood cousin, but she was raised as if she was a sister of mine, and I'm very protective of her. I'm super protective, and she's older than me, almost 10 years
Okay.
older than me. I know your son had to be protective of his baby sister, and take me through how do you kind of guide him and show him how to be protective but still kind of stay within the boundaries and not be disrespectful to someone else or maybe even hurt someone else.
I think the conversations that we had with our son was, we did have to share with him his responsibility
Right.
as an older brother,
Hmm.
especially because they were in the same school, especially in high school.
Okay.
By them being 3 years apart, he's a senior and she's a freshman.
Right.
And but we would talk to him about, you're going to be the person when I'm not around that has to make sure that she's safe and that she's not with the wrong people or someone is taking advantage of her. So, and I know sometimes it's very difficult when you are the female, that there's this sense of, well, I don't need your protection. I'm grown, or I'm old enough. I can take care of myself. And that is true. But I just think that generally, from the male perspective, I think maybe biologically we might be wired as protectors.
Right.
You're
Right.
protecting as a husband, you're a protector as a father. When you're the big brother, or in your case, you're a younger brother, but yet there's the sense of manhood and protection that's running through you. So the age is not relative.
Right,
It's
right.
it's it's your gender responsibility. And so you feel that. And I could see back looking over my son's life, there were times that he felt that. Again, sometimes uh, young ladies may push back a little bit because they want their independence and they don't want to feel like I need you to watch over me and I can take care of myself. But I
Mhm.
think it's a balance, because I don't think that I think yeah. So it should be a balance where you have to be there, you have to be a protector, but you can't go too far because sometimes they may not want you to.
Right, 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 right. Makes sense, makes sense. Now I want to circle back to something that you said earlier when you were talking about the second child, and you said William Thomas Esquire. Now that kind of just raised some curiosities, because at least for me as a parent, you have some type of idea of what you want your child to be known for, be like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe not what exactly their profession would be, but you kind of have a sense of, you know, what you would want them to do. Now, I know you play baseball. I'm pretty sure you would love for your child to be your son to be on the baseball field and doing some things in the athletic realm. How do you balance what you probably want to have happen with your child and their professions versus what they want to do themselves?
Well, you know, there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about train a child in the way that they should go.
Right.
How I interpret that is that as a parent, you should view what your child has a natural bent for, what they
Okay.
lean, what they lean towards.
Hmm.
If you see a kid running all over the place, be careful of saying, Johnny, stop running. Johnny, stop running.
Right.
Because Johnny could be giving you an indication that he's supposed to be in track and field
Right. Right. Right.
because he's always running. I remember Simone Biles, when she was a young baby, what did she do? She jumped on everything.
Hmm.
But the parents that she had recognized something in her jumping ability. And at some point, they stopped saying, stop jumping. And they started saying, keep on jumping.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
now we know that she's an Olympic, gold medalist many times over in gymnastics. So here's what I'm saying. Sometimes as a parent, you can have a desire for your child. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's the way children can go. Because there's been plenty of parents who wanted their child to become a doctor or a lawyer, maybe because that's what they did in some cases.
Hmm.
But then there are times when children are going to have their own natural bent towards what they want to do. And I think as a parent, you have to be very, very sensitive to that, because you're usually happiest by doing I believe sometimes God gives you a gift to do certain things, a passion to do certain things, and you should want to wake up every day and be happy and passionate about what you do. Now, it's always great when your passion and your joy brings you money,
Right.
because that's the best of everything. When your passion, your joy, is can be your income and allow you to be prosperous. So
Hmm.
sometimes parents say, "I want you to be this, I want you to be that," and I have seen young children go all the way through school wanting to be a doctor. I mean, not wanting to be, but training to be one, or training to be a lawyer, and then after they finish, they go do something else because they were living someone else's dream.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
you never want your child to live your dream. You really want your child to live their dream. And if their dream matches up with your dream, then that's fine. But every child should live their own dream, and you should push your child towards that which they have a natural tendency to do, because I believe that that is a gift from God.
So, at what point did you come to that understanding, or what point did you realize, or did you ever have a moment where you felt like maybe I should just step back a little bit and let my child do their thing?
Yeah, and I tell you, my son, I have a quick story about my son. Um, he we had a church many years ago, and he started to get involved with technology,
Mhm.
production and lights and stuff like that. So because he wanted to do it, I allowed him to do it in the church and setting up the mics and do all kinds of different things. But then he got more involved in it. And I'll never forget, he was the drummer for our church. But at some point he said to me, Dad, he said, listen, let's get somebody else to play the drums. I want to go and work the soundboard and work on the mics for the whole service.
Right.
And I remember telling him, yeah, go ahead. If that's what you want to do, go ahead. And then as he got older, he graduated college. And I was thinking he was going to go back to school. He got a business degree. I thought he was going to go back to school and get a MBA
Right.
for, but one day he says to me, he says, but Dad, I want to go back to school for, production, lighting and production, right? Now, I was planning on paying for him to go back to school, but he saw this truck. He took the number. He called up the office. They were looking to hire somebody. They ended up hiring him. So he ended up having on the job training, and I didn't have to pay for it, thank the Lord. but so what he wanted to do, he's now working in it and doing it. And all that he learned, he would bring it to our church, and we were a small church, but we had lighting, we had screens and projectors and all this kind of stuff because he's learning it. And even today, he's working in a ministry that's global. It's a church in Brooklyn called C3. They got 3 locations: Brooklyn, Paris, and maybe London or somewhere around the world. But anyway, he's the main production person. He's in charge of all production for this international organization. So when I saw that in him, I said, go for it.
Mhm.
And I supported him in everything that he wanted to do. And today he's supporting his family, and he's doing it in what he really wanted to do in life.
Right, right. So at what point do you say this is a non-negotiable? You may be interested in for me it was for church growing up. Regardless if unless it was like sports really, you were going to church, regardless of what your interests were. So what were some of the non-negotiables for you and your children?
Well, I experienced that a little bit myself about that. No, you can't go play no sports. You got to come to church.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't respond in that way because my education and my background allowed me to be a little bit more broader in terms of how I was raising my children. So
Right.
I didn't really have restrictions on my children as long as I saw that you were doing something productive. If you were doing something that was a passion that benefited you, again, my insight was always, why do you want to do that? And if you want to do that, there's a reason for it, and I need to be there to support it.
Right. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I mean, I might have I supported him in athletics and sports, and it would have been great if he had wanted to go in that direction. But it was like, where are you going? I'm going to support you where you're going. And especially now, somebody may say, well, what would happen if he wanted to do something wrong? Well, of course, be a drug dealer. Would you have supported that? No,
Right.
come
Right.
on. No, you're not going to support something that that's not the will of God for someone's life.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
you can't determine, in my mind, I don't think that per se a parent should determine what their child becomes. A child will let you know what they want to do. And I think that's what the scripture says: train them, support them, push them in the direction that they are bent for, because that's where they're going to have the greatest success.
Awesome. 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 Now you bring out scriptures a lot, and you talk about your kind of like the spirituality aspect of things. Now I know that you were a pastor, and how long were you a pastor?
15 years,
15 years. That is a long time.
long time.
So how did you balance being a pastor and being a father?
Wow. That's a great question. And the reason why that question strikes me because I believe that that is one of the most challenging balance acts that you can have, being a pastor of a church and then having a family. And I have seen a large number of pastors fail or incorrectly balance the relationship between the two. Why? Because they feel this great call of God to serve God's people, and they kind of put God in a place where the church and everything surrounded the church becomes so much of a priority. And I didn't have that kind of philosophy.
Mhm.
um, I made it in my mind very, very early that I was going to pastor a church, but it was not going to be at the expense of my marriage to my wife, nor the relationship that I have with my children. I refused.
Right.
I'd never, and I don't believe that I did, made my children to feel that the church and my responsibility as a pastor was greater to me than they were. I believe that's a losing proposition, because when the Bible says, what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Let me just try to take, I am a retired pastor, but I'm going to take some pastoral privileges right now.
Yeah.
what shall it profit? What shall it profit you to have this great ministry and lose your family?
Right.
See, it's the same thing. So
Mhm.
you have to have that balance. I'm sure there may have been some days my children didn't want to go to church, but then you kind of counterbalance it with, sometimes there are things in their lives that they want to do that you have to make sure that you're involved with, you're connected with, because you want them to have you don't want your children to grow up not really wanting to go to church when they become adults, right?
Right.
Or have a relationship with God, because there's been plenty of kids who, when they became adults, they said, I ain't going back to church, never.
Right.
You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Because church was oppressive to
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
A relationship with God was oppressive, and I don't believe that that's what you know God wants of us, for us to raise our families where they feel that ministry is oppression, that they are second class. And let me just say, not, well, I won't say that, but that's just the way I feel about it.
But so being a pastor, and I know you could go on, social media or everything. Pastors are always scrutinized. They're always on a microscope. First
Mm-hmm.
lady, the first family, always are on a microscope. Now, how did you kind of manage, someone who may have been critical towards your family? Because even though you're a pastor, but you're still a father. So someone
Right.
may say something about your children or your wife, and you're like, how did you manage that on the congregational side?
Yeah. It's not easy,
Mm-hmm.
because people are always going to have their opinions. Sometimes here's where a pastor has to balance things that are said about his family. Number one, you can't take what someone says personally,
Mm-hmm.
because people are always going to have something to say.
Right.
So that's in the record. But number two, you can't let people just talk about your family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, well, I'm just going to talk about the pastor's family. No, you're not. You know what I'm saying? So the pastor has, again, there's another, that he has to balance that relationship too, because sometimes everybody has an opinion, but an opinion, it can be an opinion, but it doesn't have to be vile, doesn't have to be mean spirited, because now that you have to check.
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know but um because sometimes we all have an opinion about someone else or what someone did, but you don't have to take it personal. However, you just can't let people just have their way with everything that they want to say. That's not going to happen.
Right. 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 Okay. So you were pastoring, and but you also still had a 9 to 5, and you're still working. Now that's another layer of responsibilities. You have your home, you as a father, now you have you as a wife, you as a pastor, and now you in the beast of education. The field of
Yes,
education is a
yes.
beast. How did you get through that, and how what were some of the difficulties of everything that you had going on?
You know, you're right. Every Monday morning, I went to work.
Yeah.
I, wa- I wasn't like a lot of pastors on Monday morning. That would be their day of rest.
Yeah.
No, no. Monday morning, I was headed to the job as an educator, and yeah, and it was another balancing act. And obviously, we're going to use that word a lot today. Balancing. I worked hard, 9 to 5, as an educator. Working in the school system. Sometimes days were longer because you had to be after school for something or something like that. But yet, you still have to keep in mind that you have this family and that when it's their time, you have to give them time.
Right.
When you are home, you have to be home. You can't be, a distant at a distance in the house. You got to be present. You got to kind of process things. There was sometimes when you have to leave things on the job. You can't bring it home
Right.
because if you bring it home, then now you're adding conflict.
Mhm.
So, I guess God gives you grace, because you have to have grace to do all of this. And I don't know whether you're going to get to the next thing that I did. I don't. If you don't remember, I'll tell you about it. But
Okay.
I was all, remember I was refereeing, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Um, yeah. So my, so I've done so many things, and I've had to balance it. But I feel like I did well because my children are at the stage where they are grown, and I always say when you get grown, your children will give you your report card.
Yeah.
Well, how did I do as a dad? Ask the man's children because they got his grade. They
Right.
will tell you A, B, C, F,
Right. 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 Right.
and that F is not for father either.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But I did have to balance all of those different things, and but I think God gave me grace for it. I loved it, but and I think this is the key. You have to be mindful of everything that you do. I had to be mindful of my ministry. I had to be mindful of my career as an educator. I had to be mindful of my family. I couldn't put more weight on the other, as and then overlook my family because I just again here's another. I just refuse,
Mhm.
and I just live my life where I'm not going to let anything be a priority over my wife and my children. It's just I refuse that. So I kept trying to balance it as much as I could and be watchful when I found myself leaning more away from them to other things. Nope, got to come back, got to come back because they need you. They need you.
Now, as you were talking, I thought of specific scenario because I used to teach. I taught
Okay.
3 years, and one of my sixth grade students, we were in class one day, and I let them use their phones to play this specific game, or not their phones, their laptops to play a specific game.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like she wasn't really paying attention, and so I go over there and I see that she's on this chat, and I'm like, what are you doing? We're in the middle of class. Long story
Mm-hmm.
short, is a bunch of inappropriate stuff in this chat. We have to report it to the principal. We have to report it to our mother. And the first thing I think is, how am I going to protect or shield or deal with that with my son?
Mm-hmm.
He's a newborn. He hasn't experienced stuff like that yet. But at some
Right.
point, he's going to be exposed to something that I probably have no control over. How did you deal with that as you were raising your children?
Well, I think I'm gonna be honest right here because a lot of parents think that their child is not seeing something or involved with something.
Right.
They think that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes later on in life, you find out things. You discover things.
Yeah.
Because as much as you want to be a great parent, there are always outside influences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the main thing, it's not the only thing, but the main thing that you can give your child is constant instructions,
Mhm.
constant information,
Mhm.
constantly cautioning them, with love, of course, about the world that we live in.
Right.
The world today, with because of technology, is impossible to govern, impossible to check. Just like you say, chances are, whatever that young lady was looking at, chances are her parents don't even know it. And I guarantee in most cases, though, that parent will go 20, 30 years thinking that their child never saw nothing or anything, pornographic or violent or whatever. They never, but we live in a world today because of technology where it is almost virtually impossible to avoid it. Yeah,
Mhm.
we should pray over our children. Yes, we should anoint them with all those things we should do. Yes, Lord, cover my child. But I think if I'm being honest with this audience,
Mhm.
um, your example is perfect as to something is going to happen. It becomes, hidden or, the back room or in the bathroom or somewhere, they're going to be exposed to certain things. I believe that, now my children, again, they grew up in the 90s. It's a
Mhm.
different world in the 20s, right?
Right.
And I'm sure that they were exposed to things that they didn't get from me. Here's why I know, because later on after they got grown, I found some stuff. And here's how I handled it. Because my children are grown, and I said to myself, well, there's no need in me now telling them that I discovered it.
Right.
So I just discard it and leave it. And it's just for me to know and for them never to know that I do know.
Right, 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 right.
You know what I'm saying? That's just the truth of the matter. You're gonna find some stuff. So I'm just getting you ready for little David
Yeah.
Jr. You're gonna find some stuff.
That I'm going to just heed to that. Okay, I'm just going to heed.
Yeah.
So as you're raising your children, you get to that age where puberty starts kicking in and hormones start kicking in, and I know you're just like, wow,
Yeah.
wow. Um,
Yeah.
you, you, I'm going to say this joke. Dr. Walker had less hair when I first met him. He didn't have as much hair in his hair, and I
That is
think
true.
it may have been the stress of of the kids in life. Period.
Yeah.
How do you have those difficult conversations with about puberty and hormones and just the whole concept of maturing and evolving into their own um, adults?
Yeah. I know I had some conversations with my son. Maybe I should have had more.
Hmm.
But I did have some. Now I'll be honest with you. I left the lady to the mother. I'm gonna be. That's your job. I'll talk to the son. You talk to the girl. Um. Now I will say this. My son. He has a very interesting story, and I don't want to get into too lengthy. But even though we gave him a lot of information. He was very, very wise in how he lived his life, even into his adult years. He wasn't, all out there, didn't have a whole lot of girlfriends. He had committed to the woman that he's married to, he committed to her uh, very early in her life. She was like 15 at the time he met her, and he's 4 years older.
Okay.
And yeah, he committed to her. He even told me one day, he said, Dad, that girl's gonna be my wife. And I said, you sure? He said, yeah. He said, there's only one problem. She's 15. And
Right.
he was 19 at the time. But he says, I tell you what I'm gonna do. Until she gets older, we won't have any real dating or anything like that. When she gets of age, we'll start dating. But he committed himself to her for 7 years. And when they married, he was 26 and she was 22.
Okay. Okay.
But now they got a family and all that kind of stuff. But you do have to give them the information and the tools about sexual encounters and promiscuity and sexual relations, because it's so much in the air.
Mhm.
It's just everywhere, whether you watch TV. you know um, it's just billboards and signs, everything about sex. And so you really have to be watchful, because unfortunately, a lot of our young kids are getting involved. They're having children way too soon. It's not that, you can produce children, because biologically you can, but the question is, are you prepared?
Right,
You
right,
know,
right, right.
it's hard being prepared when you are prepared.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And imagine if you're not prepared.
Now,
Now you
but
gotta.
but now I have to ask you, what does being prepared for children look like? What does that look like in your eyes?
Well, so it varies. It,
Mhm.
it varies because you can't always make it about monetary positions.
Right.
I mean, you should have a job when you have
Mhm.
kids, because you got to take care of them, but you may not have the best job.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, if I just go back, I remember marrying my wife. I didn't even have a job. She married me. I didn't even have a job. but I, but I was, but I was in my final year of college when we got married, and I guess she said, "Well, you don't have a job yet, but I'm going to invest in you."
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So I guess she saw something, and we got married maybe about in October of '83, but I graduated in June of '84. And then
Okay.
by that September, I was working. So she kind of covered me for about 6 months.
Mhm.
So, and so when you talk about being prepared, no, I think you should be emotionally prepared. That's number one,
Mhm.
because you have to be emotionally prepared to have a child. You have to be mentally prepared to have a child. Your relationship needs to be stable, because if your relationship is not stable, you know, you'll be all over the place. You'll
Right.
have a baby, but your relationship is unstable, so you're going to have challenges. And so I don't want to make preparation about a specific amount of money, because some people say, well, when I do better, I get a better job, we'll get married and all these kinds of things. Sometimes that's not going to happen in the early stages.
Mhm.
But if you can be mentally stable, emotionally stable, relationally stable, I think that's the good start. You got to have a job. It may not be top pay right now, but if you stick with it, you'll eventually grow in whatever you're doing, and then you'll be able to take care of that family.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because when I first found out that Junior was brewing and he was on the way, I
Yeah.
I was excited, and the first thing I thought was, wow, I do not have a lot of time to get myself together. I have to get myself together right now. I have to get, make things, happen now. I can't wait for it.
Right.
And that was a big challenge. What were some of the fears that you had going into fatherhood?
You wonder whether or not you have the capacity to be a good father. You have to wonder. Why do you wonder? Well, you never did it before.
Right,
So,
right, right,
there's always anxieties with doing something for the very first time. Um, I had a loving father. We didn't always have the greatest of relationships, and there was a lot of things that upset me in our relationship. And one of the things that I decided to do, I knew that when I had a son or a child, that the things that upset me, I wasn't going to do those things.
right.
That was kind of the philosophy that I had. I think it has worked successfully for me, because I always felt that if something gave me pain, why should I give that pain to somebody else?
Hmm.
Some people say you need positive examples in order to do certain things. And I say not necessarily. Sometimes you can learn from a bad example
Hmm.
or a poor example. Now you know what not to do.
Right, right, right,
Okay.
right,
And usually when you learn what not to do, that automatically tells you what to do.
right,
So
right.
there's always a learning experience through everything. So yeah, you do have those initial fears, but once that ball starts rolling, like you say, little David is formulating in there. What happens is your mind begins to start processing the weight of the responsibility. You're a dad now. Now you got to start thinking like that. You have to start preparing. You're not there yet, but you're working on it. And as long as you're working on improving yourself, you're going to
Hmm.
always end up achieving the goal that you have, and that's to be, a good dad, a great dad, a loving dad, a caring dad. And sometimes fathers think that they have to be a superhero to their child. You would be surprised, and you will be surprised how small, or how some of the small things have the biggest impact
Right.
on a child. It's not all. It's not, buying the kid a big whatever, a PlayStation. All
Mhm.
right, those are nice, but that's not really what's going to impact.
Right.
He will remember you showed up to some baseball game he was playing in. The small things are the ones that will have the greatest impact on a child.
Yeah, that's funny. So
Anyway,
I do have one last question. What advice would you give to a young man who is expecting to be transitioning into fatherhood? What's some advice that you would give them?
I would tell any person, father, um, be patient.
Hmm.
Take it one day at a time. You're never going to get all that fatherhood is overnight.
Right.
It's because your child goes through different stages that you have not yet experienced.
Hmm.
The experiences you get at, 1 and 2, 3 and 5, there's going to be some experiences at 10, 12, 15 that you haven't seen yet.
Right.
And even though you know about them because you might have done them, but now you're the guiding person over this individual, and how do you handle it? So
Hmm.
you have to take every experience as they come, with patience, with understanding, and most of all with wisdom.
Hmm.
As a dad, you have to have wisdom. How do I handle this? How do I respond? Because it's a learning experience every day. And sometimes yesterday's lesson worked today, and sometimes yesterday's lesson is not going to work.
Right. Right.
And so
Right.
you have to take this new situation differently. Your daughter's now, 16, 17. She now wants to date.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, then you start thinking about how you were treating girls when you were 16 and 17. And you be, no, you ain't going out nowhere. Really what you tell them, because I remember me. I'm telling you, that's real. That's why fathers are so tough. No, you're not going nowhere, because you know what you did. Just fooling, but I'm telling the truth. But you gotta take every day with wisdom, patience, understanding. You're not going to be the father that you will be overnight, but you will get there if you stay with it, stick with the game, never believe that you don't have the ability to be a good father, because you do. But it is a learning experience. We learn to be great dads. We don't begin as a great dad. You learn. I have been a dad for 34 years with a son and a daughter, and I'm still learning
Right.
how to, even though I'm not parenting them, my role is different. I'm still their father, but
Hmm.
my role is different. How much do I interject into my son's business? When I say business, stuff that may be going on, struggles that you go through as a young person, right?
Right. Right.
Do,
Right.
do I step in now, or do I allow my son to have his own experiences of developing and things like that? Because it's easy. I can say, son, you need some help. I can help you. But is that the
Yeah.
right thing to do?
Right. 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 Right.
Or do I have to allow him to discover this season of his life, being a dad, a two-time dad, and a wife, and how do you negotiate and figure things out? So mostly I just stay in the wings. If you need me, I'm here. Um, and I think that that's the best thing you can do for me at this particular stage. But it's constant. You're constantly learning
Mhm.
at every stage of fatherhood.
That's awesome. Awesome. That's one thing I'm going to remember. You text me that on Father's Day. You said it's a long journey. Take it one day at a time. And
One
so,
day at
to
a
all of our
time.
fathers out there, we are here for you, and we're just going to encourage you to take it one day at a time. Dr. Walker, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us and sharing some wisdom. I can't wait for you to come back on at some point because that gray hair signifies a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and I'm going to take all of it and I'm going to apply as much of it as I can. So, thank you, Dr. Walker. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, David. I'm just grateful for being on your show, and I'm looking forward to coming back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.